Hello everyone, Kobina here and welcome to my channel. So in today's tutorial, you're going to learn how to build a simple feedback application on AWS. And at the end of it all, you're going to learn how to use services like AWS Lambda, S3, API Gateway, SES, DynamoDB table, and a few other services. So basically, our application has two major components. That's the front end and the back end component. On the front end component, when users come in, they have the ability to enter their details and then also have the ability to choose a random PDF file. And then once they submit it, yes, our PDF file goes into our database successfully, and then you receive an email. So I'll quickly transition into our architecture diagram, and then you will see the services and how they integrate. So once you come into our application, you have two major components as indicated, the front end and the back end. With the front end for this project, we are going to host our application on S3, that is S3 for static web hosting, and then we will front it using CloudFront as our CDN. So CloudFront is basically a content delivery network that allows you to improve your latency, that it reduces or gives you a low latency, and then people can access your application globally without any latency. With our backend, we will make use of primarily a Lambda, and then a Lambda will be doing all the major processing, that is from storing our feedback into a DynamoDB table, and then also the uploaded PDF file, we will store it in S3, and then using the same Lambda, we will send an email through SES. We will integrate our front end and our back end using a REST API that will be created using API Gateway. And then at the end of it all, we will integrate our solution through like CI/CD process, whereby we'll be using GitHub Actions so that we can easily make changes to our front-end code and then deploy them into our S3 bucket. So let's jump right into our tutorial for today. We are going to start by creating our first S3 bucket. So I'm going to call my S3 bucket feedback PDF. Then I'll add my name so that my buckets will be globally unique. So basically all that this bucket is going to do is, this bucket is going to be our storage for the PDF that we upload from our front end or from our UI. So I'm going to leave everything as default. I will ensure that we block public access to the buckets, and then I'll proceed to create my bucket. As the bucket is creating, let me quickly go to DynamoDB table, DynamoDB, and then we'll create our first table. So basically, this is going to store our form inputs from our front end, right? So I'll come into DynamoDB table and I'll create a table, and then I'm going to call my table feedback dash copy just, and then the partition key, I'm going to call it feedback underscore ID, and then under this section, let me customize and then leave select, ensure you have on demand selected, and I'll leave everything as default, and then I'll create my table. So basically, a DynamoDB table is a NoSQL database. As our table is being created, let's now proceed to create our first Lambda function. So you come in, you search for Lambda, click on create Lambda. I'm going to call this function submit feedback function, and then the code is going to be in Python. So I'll ensure and select the latest version of Python, that is Python 3.13. Then I'll create it. So as we wait for our Python to get created, don't worry guys, as I always do, I'll do all to provide you guys access to our code, right? I'll do well to give you guys access to our Lambda code so that if you want to create this tutorial, if you want to follow the tutorial, you have access to all the code used for the project. So now our Lambda is created. I'll quickly replace the code, and then we'll do ahead to do some slight configuration. So let me try and then explain what you have in our code. So basically, our Lambda code is just doing the 3 key processes we shown in our architecture diagram, right? It's kind of storing the feedback from the form inputs into the DynamoDB table. It's also uploading our file, that's the PDF file, into our S3 bucket, and then the same Lambda function is sending an email. So that's pretty much it. All that our Lambda function is doing. So in the Lambda code, I'm checking and then handling calls. So basically, calls is, since we are hosting our front-end application on S3, and then we are going to integrate it using API gateway. So calls is just a security feature that allows the 2 applications or the 2 components to integrate together very well. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So in the Lambda code, we are doing that, and then we are getting the details from our front end. That's the feedback ID, the email, the message, and then the file we are uploading. And then we are using a put object operation to store it in our S3 bucket. And before that, we kind of generating a person URL also, so that after we've sent the feedback, we've uploaded the feedback, the admin or the people to receive the feedback can also download whatever document you submitted through the email they receive. So that's pretty much it. And then the last component is we sending an email using SCS. So in here, all these things are just random HTML and CSS stuff, just to help improve the styling of the email that you receive. So that's pretty much it. So we have a couple of environment variables that we have to declare. So I'll just proceed to do that. So in order to do that in your Lambda, you come to configuration, and then I'll click on environment variables. And then I'll begin to edit my environment variable for this project. So we have a few of them. So the first one is the table name. So that's basically our DynamoDB table name. We will populate it shortly. I think we have a bucket name also as a key. All these things are coming in from our Lambda code. So I have it stated somewhere, that's why I'm copying it. But once you see in the code, you see all the environment variables you are supposed to replace. You have admin email. That is the email of the admin to receive the form input or whatever you upload. And I think the region. Alright, so I'm going to complete all these values. So our S3 bucket, I think we named it as let me look for my buckets. Yes, so this is the bucket we created. So I'll get the name PDF, copy just, then I'll paste it in here. My bucket name. My DynamoDB table too is ready. Oops, so that is feedback, copy just. I'll edit that. Yeah, guys, when you copy something, you paste, please ensure you see I have a blank or an empty space here. If I didn't recognize this could have given us an error later part in the tutorial. So the email that you're going to use is this of my personal emails. And then the region is going to be US East 1. Alright, so please, one thing to notice, the email you are going to use at this point has to be verified in SCS. So I'll quickly show you guys how to do that. So because for the purpose of the tutorial, we are using the sandbox version of SCS, right? And then with that, you can't just send email to any email address unless the email address is verified in your particular AWS account and region. So once you come into this account, you will see that I've verified this email. That's the email I used in here. Under the configuration, you will see that I've verified it. In order to verify your email, all that you have to do is, once you come into SCS, just come to Identities, and then create Identities, select email, and then put your email in here. Once you enter your email, You click on create identity, and once you do that, you receive a confirmation email that will require you to confirm. So once you go into your email, you will get it, and then once you confirm, you will see that you have this thing as verified, and then now you can proceed to use your email address. Guys, kindly feel free to like and subscribe to the channel, and as I always say, I promise you that I will be providing you guys with valuable AWS content always. Alright, now that we have our Lambda ready, we'll proceed to create our API. So you come to API gateway. I want you guys to see this thing step by step. If you have any questions, always feel free to drop it in the comments, and I'll be very happy to respond or to reply. So for this project, you are going to create a REST API. So API is basically a programming interface that is going to link our backend component through our front-end component. You'll be sending requests and all that through the APIs. So I'm going to call my API feedback API. Let me give it a description. This is for demo. Let me leave it as original, everything as default, and I'll click on create API. Yes, so once my API is created, I'm going to start by creating a resource. So my resource, I'm going to call it submit. Guys, be very careful with the resource name, as this is very crucial once we are going to integrate it with our front end. I'm going to enable proxy. I'm going to enable CORS. As I said, CORS is basically CORS basically allows front-end domain, right? That's our front-end that you are going to host on S3 to integrate with our APIs and everything through the browser. So it's more or less a security feature, or a security feature of browsers that allows you to make API calls to other domains securely. So I'll ensure I've enabled CORS, and I'll create my resource. Sorry, I think I'm facing the slides. Network issue. Oops. Alright. Sorry guys. I think I was struggling with my internet a bit. But the same thing. So submit. And then CORS. And I'll create the resource. Good. And once I have that, I'm going to add a method to my API. So since we are sending feedback from the front end, the method I'm going to create is going to be a post method, which will allow me to send the feedback from our form inputs from the front end into our database. And then we are going to use Lambda as our backend. That is the feedback Lambda we created. So I will ensure you have Lambda selected, and I'll look for my Lambda. So it's called submit feedback. So I'll select this Lambda, and then I will enable Lambda proxy integration for now. Let me disable this feature for now. Great. I think we are handling everything. I won't invent in our Lambda, so there is no need for us to enable that. Good. So now we've added our method. We've added CORS to it. Let me ensure everything is enabled properly for our test. So I ensure CORS is enabled properly for everything, and then I'll click on save. So now our API is ready. The last thing to do is, once you create an in-your API gateway, or once you make changes to API gateway, you always have to ensure that you deploy the API. So I'm going to proceed to deploy my API. So I'll come into deploy API, and then I'll create a new stage. I'm going to call it prod. Then I'll click on deploy. So sorry guys, my network is very terrible today. I don't know why. Alright, so I think our API is deployed successfully. So this is our invoke URL. So this is the URL that we are going to integrate with our front-end components. So I'll quickly jump and then show you what we have for our front-end. For this project, we basically have a very simple index.html file that we are going to use for our static web hosting. It's just a single page, because the focus of this class is for us to know and then understand as cloud engineers to build our backend components and infrastructure in cloud. But everything remains the same. If you are working with huge projects and everything, you're just going to create your Lambdas, your APIs and all that. This is just a simple UI that I generated, I think with the help of AI also. So that's pretty much it. So what matters the most to us is we are going to replace this URL, right? We are going to replace this URL. So, sorry. This URL with the URL we got from the API gateway. But before we do that, let's go and then before we do that, let's go ahead and then create our S3 buckets that will host our web application. We are going to create a new S3 bucket, and that will be used for hosting our web application. So I'm going to call that feedback -ui -app. Then I'll add my name to make the bucket globally unique. We are going to ensure that we block public access. So what we are going to do is we will be accessing our website through CloudFront as we came across in our architecture diagram, that users will access our application through CloudFront. So our S3 bucket is going to remain private. So I'll come down, leave everything as default, and then I'll create the bucket. And once the bucket is created, I'll proceed to enable static web hosting for the bucket. So I'll just enter the bucket and I'll come to properties. And under properties, I'll scroll down to where you have the static web hosting, and then I'll click on edit. And then I'll enable it. So you have to do a slight configuration in here. So what you are going to set is you are going to set your default page. So you see, when you come to our application hosted on our local, this is the default page that you see when you access this URL. So what you are going to do is, for our S3, we want to indicate the file. We want to indicate the file we want to access. So our file is going to be an index.html. That was the file I showed earlier on. That is this file in our code base. So I'll come in here and then leave everything else as default, and then I'll save the page. I'll save the settings. And once this is done, you can see now we have a URL to access our bucket. If I try to access my website using this URL, I expect to get a form of error. I think because the URL is not secured. That's why, but I'm going to continue to access the site anyway. We are going to resolve this by using the CloudFront. So you can see we have access denied, right? And we're getting this access denied because our S3 bucket, we blocked public access to the bucket. So I'll proceed to upload our index.html, and then we will proceed to the next stage. So I'll come to upload. I already have this index.html file on my local. It's a simple web application. I'll do all to give you access to that in the GitHub repo. So I'll click on upload, and then I have my index.html file uploaded. Now I'll proceed to search for CloudFront. And then once you come to CloudFront, I'm going to start by first doing this. To create an origin access, right? So you click on origin access, and then I'm going to create an access control. So I'll click on create control settings, and I'll give it a name. So I'm going to call this feedback UI S3 access. Let me call it this way, S3 access. And I'm going to leave everything as default and click on create. So basically what this is going to do is this feedback UI S3 access will allow only people coming in from CloudFront to be able to access our web application. So I'll now come to distribution, and I'll create a distribution. So I'll click on create distribution, and then under origin name I'll select my bucket. That's the UI bucket. So if you can see, I have feedback UI app. I'll select this, and then I'll come to origin access control, and then I'll select the origin that access that we just created, right? That is feedback UI S3 access. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to generate a bucket policy that we will later on copy to S3, and then we will restrict people from accessing our bucket directly, and then they can access our buckets only through CloudFront. So I'll leave this thing, and then under this settings I'll leave everything as default for now. Okay, so once you come to web application firewall, we are not going to front our application using WAF. WAF is another extra security layer. I'm not going to enable that, so I'm going to disable it. And then under settings, for the default root object, this is optional, but for now I'm just going to point it to our index.html. So basically what we are saying is if someone access our CloudFront URL directly, right, and they don't even enter the access is to the domain without /index.html, it should by default point them to this URL. So that's pretty much what we are doing with this. Alright, so we'll proceed to create our distribution. And as you can see, it has generated our bucket policy for us. So I'm going to copy this thing and then bring it into our S3. So once I come into S3, that's the feedback UI app S3. So I come into permissions, and then I'll scroll down. So I then attach this bucket policy. So what I copied it from there. So all that the policy is doing is it's allowing access to CloudFront, and then we are restricting it to the distribution we created, right? So this distribution that we created, we are just restricting the access to that said distribution. So all that I'm going to do is I'm going to proceed and save these changes. So what this means is now anybody can then access our website securely through our CloudFront distribution. That is this URL, right? So the domain name. So now anyone can access this web application. So if I paste this thing in here, if everything is right, oh sorry, I feel the distribution is still deploying. So that's why I had that error. So we are going to wait for some few minutes to ensure that our distribution is well deployed, and then we can see whatever we have. All right. All right, so now we have a distribution deployed. So once you see the distribution deployed, that is last modified, we can now copy our distribution domain and then access the application again to see what happens. And here we have it. Now we can access our web application from our domain. So we will proceed to do few fixes and then few testing. So what you are going to do now is, I want you guys to see some few permissions issue and then how to resolve it. So now we have our Lambda that is in our backend. We have our Lambda configured, we have our front end configured, we've created our API, and then we've hosted our web application. So what you are going to do is to test and see. I expect us to get few errors that I personally didn't fix, and then we will proceed to resolve them. So now I'll come to my UI and then I'll try uploading a file. Yeah, so that we see the logs as things happen. I want us to see what is happening behind the scenes. So I'll come in here and then enter my name and then the verified email address. That's a recipient. The sender's email, which in this case is going to be my own email. And then I'll put in, this is a test, just a random test. And I'll choose a random PDF from my local. This is the PDF. And I'll click on submit. I expect us to get a few errors. Oops, feedback uploaded successfully. Alright. I think the front end is handling it wrongly, but I know something is wrong. Let's go into our Lambda logs, right? Our backend Lambda logs to see if indeed the feedback was uploaded successfully. So if you come into our Lambda logs, you see now no logs has been generated. And then the UI is telling us feedback is uploaded successfully. So if it indeed was successful, if I come into the feedback PDF bucket we created initially to store the PDF, we should see the PDF in here. It's not in here. So it means something is not working right. Guys, don't pay so much attention to the front end code. As I said, our role is more of an engineering role. So this is just a simple interface that we generated. So now, for us to see what exactly is happening, right? Our API, we are not really hitting our API. That is, if you come into a front end code from this point, you see this is not the actual API we got from this. So this is the dummy API. So it's I think this is a live API in one of my personal accounts. That's why the UI was working with that. So I'm just going to change any of these values so that it indeed becomes dummy. So this is not a right or a correct URL, right? Or in fact, let me make it better and then do it replace. Let me add replace here. So I'm going to add replace here, save this, and then I'm going to update whatever we have in our S3 bucket. So you see, before we setting up a CI/CD process, if I want to update my web application, now I'll have to go to my local and then make changes to the web application and then manually come and then upload it into a UI bucket, right? So I'm coming to update this file. And as we all can see, this is very hectic. So if you have a huge application, you always have to zip it and then upload it manually. It is very, very hectic. That's why the CI/CD or the CD process we are going to talk about later on is very crucial and very important. So I'm going to update this file. And once you update this file, as we mentioned earlier on, our CloudFront, right, is serving a version of an application to our users, that's our end users. So once we've updated the file, our CloudFront at this point is still serving the whole version of our application. So what we are going to do now is, inside our CloudFront, we have to invalidate our cache, right? We have to invalidate the version it's serving our users, and then so that the CloudFront will be able to get the more recent or the much recent version. So I'm going to click on create invalidation, and then I'll put /star. So I want to invalidate everything in the S3 bucket. So I'll click this. Guys, don't worry. Once we integrate this with GitHub, we are going to solve all these issues so that once we make changes to our front-end code, we will not have to come into our S3 bucket to upload it and then come here and then invalidate everything. So now I've done these changes. All right, so it's completed. So if I come in here and then I refresh this page, let me try uploading another file and see what will happen. I'm going to select our PDF once again and try uploading it. So now, as I said, indicated earlier, initially we were using a live API, that's why we got the success. Now we are getting an error. So if you can see from this side of things, you see the URL we are trying to access, replace doesn't say this is not a valid URL. So what we are going to do now is I'm going to now help us do our integration with our CI/CD integration, and then we proceed to fix our subsequent errors. But before we do that, I want us to fix some few Lambda permissions issues. No, let's go back so that we will see the errors and then we'll fix them in runtime in our backend. I really want you guys to see how that goes, other than just fixing the permissions. Else, once you are working on a project and then you are getting errors, you won't know how to handle them. And that's not the goal for this tutorial. I want you guys to experience this real time. Okay, so this is my code. I'm going to try and then deploy it into GitHub. All right, let me do this. So let me quickly log into my GitHub. Let me quickly sign into. So I'm trying so that you guys see what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to sign into GitHub. I think I've received an email on my personal email. So let me validate it. Now in my GitHub repo, I'm going to proceed to create a new repo that we can clone and then use for our project. So let me call this feedback UI app. Okay, so this is going to be the repo you are going to use for the project. I'm going to leave everything. I'm going to make this thing public, and then add a readme. So this is just a regular stuff. You can use any source control of your choice or something of the sort. But for this project, because you are going to use GitHub Actions, I will require you guys to use GitHub. So I'll click on create. I'm creating this new repo, and then I'm going to clone it to my local. So I'm just going to clone this. So I'll come into my VS Code and then I'll try and open a new folder. Let me call it. No. Let me open. So this is my folder. Oh, yeah. Let me just open a new folder rather. That would be great, and then we're organized. So let me just put it in here. Call it demo. Yeah, guys, you can just have any random folders and then do that. That doesn't really care. So now I'm going to clone the repo, really. So let me open a new terminal, and then I'll do git clone, and then I'll paste the URL that I copied for the git repo that we have. So now I've cloned the repo, right? So this is our repo. Let me then open let me just open the repo folder directly. So this is the repo folder that we have. I'm just going to open it. So now this is currently what we have. So this is our GitHub repository. And then I'm going to create my index.html file. So guys, you can just create it and then you can just paste the code in there. I should have this code somewhere on my local. So let me try and then open that file. I should have it. So under downloads, this is it. Okay, so I'm going to copy this from my local and then put it in this file we just created. Good. So now we have this, and then once we have this, I'm going to quickly do a slide change or a slide modification. Now I'll come back to GitHub, and then we are going to set up our GitHub action for our CI/CD process. But before we do that, we have to get some permissions and access key from AWS. So what you are going to do is on AWS, you are going to search for IAM. And then I'm going to create a user that's for my GitHub. So I'm going to call it GitHub S3 deployer. So I'm going to call this, you can give it any name, S3 feedback, so that's deployer. And then I think I'll leave this in as it is now. We just need it for, we don't need any console access. So I'm going to attach my permissions. So I'll click on create a default policy. I want to restrict it very much and then give it just some few policies. So the first policy or the first permission we require is S3. Since our UI, right? Basically, what we want GitHub to do is GitHub will host our code, and then it will deploy stuff into our S3, and then we want GitHub to be able to invalidate, and then the cache also. Also, we want GitHub to be able to put objects in our S3 bucket, delete them, and then list the objects in the S3 bucket. So I'm going to select these permissions for S3. So the first one is going to be put objects. So I'll set for put objects. And then I'll look for delete, so that if we make any changes, if we delete any file from our local, we will be able to do that. So I'm going to look for delete objects. And then I think I'll need one extra permission, that is list objects in the bucket. Sorry, list bucket. And then for resources, I'll select all. So this is one. And also we will require another permission. We require a permission for us to invalidate CloudFront. So I'll search for CloudFront. And then there's that permission is going to be create invalidation. So basically this is going to invalidate our CloudFront, our resource. I'm going to select all. If you are working on an environment where you have to restrict to a specific ARN or stuff, that too is fine. But for this demo, I'm going to leave everything a bit open. All right. So I'm just going to give my policy a name, just similar name as policy. GitHub deployer policy. And I'll click this. So now, once I come back to why I'm creating my users, I can search for the policy we just created. So GitHub, let me refresh. Then I'll select this then. So this is the policy with the permissions, right? That we just assigned. So the permissions are just US3 permissions and then CloudFront validation. So I'll click this and then I'll create the user. So now I have this user in this account. So basically this is more or less going to be a GitHub user, right? So that when we push our code into GitHub, it can reflect in our S3 bucket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a security credential that I will later on pass in S3. So once I come into the user and then you come into security credential, scroll down to access keys and click on this. For now, I'm going to select other, and then I'll click on next. My description for GitHub access. Then I'll click create key. So I'm going to download this to my local, and then I can update it. So now let's come back to our GitHub. and then set up our GitHub action. So in our GitHub repository, you come to settings up here, and under settings, you will see actions. Under settings, you see secrets and variables. Under secrets and variables, click on actions, and then under actions, I'm going to add my AWS keys and all these things as secrets so that no one can have access to these things. So I'll click on new repository variables. Sorry, they've changed the values a bit, the UI a bit. Okay, so the first one we are going to save is our access key ID. So the access key ID is what I obtained from our AWS. So I'm going to copy my access key and then I'll paste it in here in GitHub. Don't worry, at the end of this tutorial, I'm going to invalidate it, so you can't even make use of my access key. So this is the first key. I will then add a new secret, and that is going to be our access secret key. So I'll come back to my AWS and then copy my access secret key and then paste it in here. The next thing I'm going to do is my AWS region. I'm going to add AWS region. So AWS region, and the region we are using is US East 1. So whatever region you are deploying your project, then I'll take S3 bucket. That's the next key I want to add. So the bucket is going to be our website bucket's name. So I'll come back into S3 and then pick the right name. Oops. So yeah, let me close. So this is our bucket, which is feedback UI app copy just. So I want you guys to see there is an empty space. Let me remove it. And now my CloudFront distribution. Remember, we will be invalidating the CloudFront also. So I'm going to add that secret here. So my CloudFront ID. How will I get that? Once I come into CloudFront. Okay. So this is my CloudFront ID. So I'll just copy this and then paste it in here. Hope there are no empty spaces. Add secret. So now if I've set my secret, so basically my GitHub repo will make use of these secrets if you want to access the AWS access key and the permissions and everything that we assigned. Alright, so now that you are done with this, I'll come back to my code on my local. So what you are going to do is to, inside my GitHub code base, I'm going to create a file path. Please pay key attention to this. So this is going to be called, just have it in this form. First, it's going to be a folder that is .github. Then under this folder, I'm going to create another folder, which is workflows. So please ensure you see and then you have this same folder structure. And under the workflows, I'm going to create a deploy.yaml file. So basically, the deploy.yaml file would contain the code that will tell our GitHub what to do when we make push to this code. So I'll do all to give you access to all this code, then you can follow for your tutorial. So if you see this thing, all that is coming in is, if I make any push to my GitHub main branch, right, I want to run these commands. The first thing is I'm getting some AWS credentials. So these are the access key and stuff like that we added to our GitHub environment. And then we want to upload whatever code is in this directory into our AWS S3 buckets. And then after that, we want to invalidate our CloudFront distribution. So these are the things we want to do. So all the things we manually did, now we've added them as part of our code. So I'm going to save this thing, and then I will make a push to my GitHub repository. But before that, I want us to all observe something. So let's see the last time the code base was modified. So this is it. So if everything is set up rightly or properly, we should be able to make progress. So I'll open my terminal, and then I'll make my first push. So I'll do git add git push, git commit, or you know what, so that we will see the changes in real time, and then we will appreciate it the more. I'm going to add something to our header. That is our feedback form. Let me do test 1 in here, so that at least when you go there, we will see the difference. So currently, we have it as this feedback form, but I've made changes. So if everything is configured rightly, and then our GitHub action is working with our AWS account and the permission is everything is fine, we should see a UI change, and then we will wrap up by fixing our Lambda code. So I'll do commit, then I'll put it in there, testing GitHub action. This can be any message. So I'm going to make a push to my repo. So I'll do git push. So now let me come back to my code repo again. So as you see, now you can see the changes, and then the commit message I made and everything. Alright, now let's go to our AWS, the S3 bucket, and let me refresh and see if anything has happened, a change. Okay, let's wait for some few minutes. Oops. Now let me come to my actions. Alright, so our push failed, and then we'll try and then see what happened. Oops, sorry, let me go back one step. Let me click on it to try and see if I'll get some few details. Okay, so it seems there is a problem with my deploy.yaml file. I'm trying to access it in the .frontend folder, but I don't have it that way, so I'm quickly going to fix that. So in our front-end code, I think here is where we're having that issue. So instead of .frontend, I want to do just dot. So that should fix whatever problem we are currently facing. Or the easy another route we can follow just to organize stuff. Let me maintain it as this way, and then let's add a front-end folder. Then we can move our index.html into our front-end folder. So that will make it much better. So let me move it. Alright, so this should fix this issue for us. So yes, so let me do it. Test 1. Or let me make it test 2, and then let's see what happens. So I'm going to now push it. If everything is fine, guys, if you would like me to maintain showing you guys some of the errors you are likely to face whilst working on a project, just leave a comment. Or if you want us to edit out all those things too, we can do that. But I feel it's a good thing for us to see as we build, right? So GitHub, let me do second push, and then let me git push. Alright, so now let me come back to my GitHub Actions and then see my second push, how this is faring, deploying. Hopefully if everything is right. Alright, so my second push was a success, and as a result of that, if I come into S3, let's see you see the last modified was this. This is my current local time. Let me refresh this. So you can see our websites have updated. And then now if I come in here, if the code is working, you can see now if I've invalidated, we have invalidated the cache again as we did through the console. So now, whatever changes we make from our UI, it will reflect on our web application and we will just push. So we have just set up a very simple CD process, right, for our whole thing. So now what we are going to do is, we are now going to proceed to make changes and then point our front end to our actual URL. So let me come, that is our actual API gateway URL that we created. So back to our API gateway, just come to API gateway, select the API you created and then stages, and then you get the URL. So I'll pick it up and then I'll come to my front end code and then replace it. So where you have the replace placeholder, come and then replace this thing. Oops. Alright. So once I save this and I make a push now, my front end should hit our backend that we deployed. And then we are going to fix our few backend permission issues and then the project will be completed. So now I'm going to quickly push it, git commit. So let me add then API endpoint. So git push. So I'm going to now push it. And then let me change the message to test. We are currently at test 2. Test 3. So that you see that yes, it's working. Copy. It's not performing any magics. Alright. So our workflow should be in process now. Adding API endpoints. So once this thing gets created, it should update our web application and then we will see. I expect us to get, let me see. Alright, it's still in process. So let's wait for some few minutes. Alright, done. So if everything is done successfully, let's come and see. I think it's still working. It's here to happen. Let me see my distribution. Probably it's updating or something. Oops. Seems I didn't save it, the change we made. Oh, sorry. I didn't save the changes we made, so let me quickly fix that. Sorry guys. So that's why we are not seeing the alphabet change as I suspect. But the API and everything has been changed. I just want us to see. And then follow our account properly. Alright, there you have it. So our latest change has happened. So now let's fix a few Lambda errors and we will bring the tutorial to an end. So I'm just going to add my name, Kobina, the same email address. This is a test. I expect it to fail once again. But now we should be hitting our actual API. Oops, sent successfully. Okay, let's see what is happening. In our S3, there is no item in there, as I said. So it's trying to send some few stuff, but we don't see the upload. So let's come into our Lambda once again and look at the logs for the Lambda. Yes, so now you can see the first log stream, right? I'm sure our Lambda failed for some permission issues. Oh, yep. So this is a mistake that I did initially. So after updating my Lambda code, right, always when you create a Lambda and then you update it, you have to deploy your Lambda. But I did not deploy the Lambda. So now, if I come to the logs, all that I'm showing was the default Lambda snippet that you see when you create your Lambda. So I'm just going ahead to test my API submission again. I think that's why it's showed that it worked, because it was not even trying to do what we asked it to do. Test. Let me choose the same file. And then let's see what happens now. Okay. Now let me come to our Lambda logs. Then open the latest. Okay, so this is the latest. So you see, we are having access denied. So basically what is happening is our Lambda is struggling to perform a put object operation on our submit feedback PDF bucket, right? So after submitting it, we are struggling to perform a put operation. That is, you are struggling to upload that file. So we are going to solve that Lambda issue, and then we will solve the subsequent Lambda permissions issues. So by looking at the code and looking at what the Lambda is doing, the errors we are going to get, in order to not waste our time, is there is a tendency of us getting a put item error, a send email, and then probably I think just these two should be fine. So the sending email and then the put stuff too should. So I'm just going ahead to fix the Lambda errors and then see. So I'll just come into my Lambda code, click on configuration once again, and I'll come to permissions, and then I'll click on this row name. So I click on the add and then attach my policy or permissions. Alright, so the first Lambda permission we are getting is S3 put. So I'll set for S3 put, hopefully S3 put object, and then all, and then I'll add permissions, and I'll do, let me see, I think S3, sorry, I think let me select here again, S3, but in this case I need get objects. Okay, and now the next service I'm going to do for is SES, so that you can send that email. I don't want us to get that error. So I'll find send email. Alright, so let me do submit feedback policy. You can give it any name. Oops. I didn't add the permission right. The SES once again. So send. I want to allow all for no resource. Policy. Then I'll proceed to create my policy. Alright. So this is one. Okay. So now that I've done this, let me come to my UI again and try uploading it. In this case, let me make the name Justice, the email test. Let me choose a file, open, and then submit. Yeah. So our UI seems to be working fine. In our case, our UI seems to be working pretty fine. Just that, oops, where is this CloudWatch? So let me see the latest log. Let me open this and see. Okay, so if I see the look at the time and then the event, so I'm getting it, but I'm still getting some permission issues for the justice also. So it's saying, oh, okay. So we fixed the put item for the S3 permissions, but this case too is going into a DynamoDB table too. I haven't forgotten about a DynamoDB table. So if this thing worked fine, let me see what happened in our feedback PDF bucket. You see now you have the item in there. So this was the item that we obtained initially. So we are going to fix our permission for the how do you do this? The DynamoDB table entry also. So our DynamoDB table at this point still should be empty. So if I come explore items, it's very empty. I feel the SES bit 2 should work now since we've been able to send the email. So let me come to my Gmail and then see. Yeah, I feel you should get an email. Alright, so this is it. No, this is part of some of the old. So the email bit 2 was coming in fine. This is a very old. Look at the time. So let's just test it out again. So under our Lambda permissions, once again, I'm going to edit our policy statement that we created. And then I'll add that for DynamoDB too. So visualize permissions. So this permission stuff, I'm mostly getting these errors because I just want us to see it in real time for our tutorial, right? So that when you are getting it and then you are working on any project, these are the things you go through. Yes, but once you keep on building it, you keep on building projects, you get to a point where when you are working on your solutions, you know all the errors that you are likely to get. So you resolve most of your permissions even before you get to this point. Yeah, but I just want you guys to see it and then appreciate it. That's why we are going through all these things. So now let's come back to our UI again. Guys, don't worry so much about my UIs. Let me do covenant justice. I feel it's not handling our errors properly when it gets to the UI. But because we are not UI folks, that doesn't really matter. What that matters in our tutorial is our AWS components working fine. And then you understanding it. If you have any questions, always feel free to drop it. So let me click on submit. Okay, we have it submitted. Let me come back to our CloudWatch log and see the latest log. Okay. Alright. So here we have it. Now, the next one, the name Combina Justice. These are events and then sent email successfully. So let me check the email real quick. So there we have it. Look at the time and then my time. We just got this email. And then this is it. So now if I want to download my PDF, this is the document I downloaded. Basically an instruction to follow to create a project. So there we have it. Our system is working end to end. So a quick recap on all that we did. So basically we started by creating a PDF S3 bucket, the feedback bucket, and then we proceeded to create our Lambda function. That is the Lambda function which is doing the conversion and everything. And then we went ahead to set some environment variables. So these are the environment variables. So you come into configurations, environment variables, and then we did set all those things up. We created our DynamoDB table, and then we created our DynamoDB table, and then we proceeded to create an API, that is a REST API, which was integrating with our front end. We deployed our API, and then we went ahead to create our S3 bucket to host our web application. And then from then, we went ahead to configure our GitHub repository and then set up a simple GitHub workflow, which shows our application deployment and then we came ahead to make changes to our code. So now once you make the changes, you push it and everything works fine from our front end. So this is basically a very simple but powerful AWS project that you can add to your resume. Kindly do well to subscribe and like the video, and then I would really appreciate it. Feel free to drop in the comment section the next project you want me to build or for us to build together. Thank you so much for watching, and then see you in the next video.